Saint George of Kratovo. Saint George of Kratovo was born in 1497 and his parents were Demetrios and Sarah. Saint George received a fine upbringing and was pious and chaste. He studied the Holy Scriptures, but his father died when he was 10, so he had to support his family by taking on the trade of a goldsmith. He was a handsome young boy, and in order to avoid being abducted, molested, and indoctrinated by the Turks, he fled with his mother's approval to Sofia in Bulgaria when he was 12 years old. There he lived a devout life and met the devout priest named Peter. Under Father Peter, the young George continued his education and working at his craft as a goldsmith. Certain Muslims took notice of him, though, and desired to convert him to Islam. A certain knowledgeable Muslim one day went to George to persuade him to convert, but as a pretext he went with enough gold to commission from George a piece of jewelry. He received a considerable sum for his work, including food and a large tip in order to win George's affection. The money George received he put aside for his mother. However, the Muslim scholar remained in the shop and began a religious dialogue with George. Little did he know, though, that George was well versed in both the teachings of his own Orthodox Christian faith as well as that of his Muslim neighbors. As they talked, George showed the Muslim how what he offered was temporary pleasures and glory in this world, but what he sought was to live a virtuous life on this earth in order to live eternally with Jesus Christ. He therefore put the Muslim to shame and left him dumbfounded. Instead of conceding, the Muslim sought revenge. He therefore gathered some friends and accused George before the judge in Sofia. He was accused of blaspheming and mocking the Muslim religion and disdaining the authority of the Sultan. To get George to appear before the judge, the Muslim scholar told him that he found employment for George through the judge who sought to commission certain ornaments for his house. When the young and innocent George, who merely sought to support his family, appeared before the judge to render his services, the judge said that he will give him the work only if he first became a Muslim. Filled with the grace of the Holy Spirit, the young George again began to refute all the arguments of the Muslims and remain steadfast in his Orthodox Christian faith. The judge and those with him became really enraged with George and ordered him to be imprisoned. As he was being led to prison, he was mocked and kicked and beaten by the Muslims on the way. Father Peter saw this and sought for George's release. The prison guard, who was acquainted with Father Peter, merely allowed them to meet and talk. The conversation was one of encouragement for the young George, who was certain to die for his faith. Father Peter encouraged him to remain faithful and strong till the end, and endure for a short moment the pain in order to gain eternal rest and reward. A few days passed in which George was continuously urged to convert or die, but he remained steadfast and continuously put the Muslims to shame. Never had George been at the center of such unbridled hatred. The mob wanted to tear him to pieces, but the judge held them back. Seeing that George would not convert, the judge finally asked the mob what should be done with him. They replied that he should be consumed by fire and his ashes scattered to the wind. The judge thought the judgment very harsh, but eventually left it to the crowd. The crowd therefore tied George's hands behind his back, put a chain around his neck, and dragged him to the marketplace. An Islamic herald then called for the faithful Muslims to gather and bring wood for the burning. The wood was gathered by the multitude, and they brought George to the church of Hagia Sophia in Sofia. Father Peter followed him and encouraged him to endure and remain faithful to the end, and George asked for his prayers that God would strengthen him. Some Muslims overheard them speaking, and they dragged Father Peter away. However, there was a certain crypto-Christian who appeared like a Muslim that Father Peter knew, and Father Peter asked him to get as close as possible to overhear anything that George said and what was said to him and to report it back to him. The crowd piled the wood and lit a great fire. The Muslims dragged George to the fire, and after his flesh burnt for a bit, they would take him away, mocking him and wanting to torture him, but George assured them that he neither feared this fire nor the eternal fire of hell. The fire virtually burnt the rope that bound his hands, which allowed George to raise his hands in prayer, do his cross, and surrender his spirit to the Lord. Suddenly a Muslim hit George over the head with a piece of wood and immediately killed him. A cloud then came over the fire and released a heavy rain to put out the flames. This took place on February the 11th, 1515, on Mid-Fair Sunday. Father Peter then gathered some Christians and they took the body of George to bury him. However, the Muslim mob was not satisfied and therefore proceeded to build another fire greater than the first. The body of the martyr was then cast into the flames, but no matter what they tried, the body would not be consumed. The guards took then the carcasses of animals and threw them into the flames, so the Christians could not distinguish between the bones of George and those of the animals. The body of the martyr, however, continued to remain sound and intact. The guards informed the Christians to go home and allow the body to burn for the whole day. While the Christians and Father Peter went home, a certain Christian informed them that he would stay and try to take the body and bring it to the house of the priest. Somehow he was able, through a clever operation, to take the body, and he brought it to the cathedral of Holy Great Martyr George. The priest then received permission from the judge, who now looked at George as a saint, to bury the body. On May the 26th, 1515, the holy relics of St. George were removed from the grave, placed in a coffin, and then brought into the church of St. Marina with due honor. The biography of St. George was eventually written by Father Peter between 1515 and 1523. The work was published by Serbian intellectual Stojan Novakovic in 1867, transcribed from a manuscript held in the National Library of Serbia in Belgrade. Milan Milicevic wrote a work on George in 1885. In Bulgaria, where he is known as St. George, the New of Sofia, he became especially honored during the Bulgarian national revival after Paisius of Philander included him in the list of Bulgarian saints in his Historia Slavanobolskaya 1762. In 1855, Nikola Karastolyanov from Samovkov printed the life of St. George the New based on a manuscript kept in the Metropolitan Library of Sofia. During the first half of the 19th century, St. George the New became popular also among Bulgarian painters and was depicted in many churches. In Serbia, it has been maintained that his father and mother were of Serbian origin. Bulgarian sources claim that he and his parents were Bulgarians. According to the Orthodox Church, George of Kratovo is celebrated on the 11th of February.